Good evening and welcome. I'm Brian Adnoff, President of Doctors for Drug Policy Reform. Thank you so much for joining us as we mark our 10th anniversary. D4DPR began in 2016 as Doctors for Cannabis Regulations, when few physicians were openly engaged in ending the drug war. Since that time, we have grown into an organization of several hundred physicians, other medical providers, and scientists, bringing medical and scientific expertise into drug policy discussions. This evening is both a celebration of our 10-year journey and a tribute to our founder, David Nathan. His vision, persistence, and leadership has established D4DPR as a respected and influential voice in drug policy reform. Over the next hour, you will hear from four distinguished speakers, including David Nathan, who will reflect on the broader trajectory of drug policy reform, the increasing engagement of medical professionals, and the development of regulatory frameworks, all shaped in part by the work of D4DPR. We will also include brief recorded video reflections from leaders across the reform community. If you'd like, feel free to share a brief note of congratulations to David in the chat. As you listen, we hope you will consider supporting D4DPR. A link will be provided in the chat. We are also making available a limited number of the original 2015 Declaration of Principles for DFCR, a document printed on hemp paper, and more details will be provided at the end. Before we start with our program, I want to thank Hunter Platzman and Lisa Capitani for their work behind the scenes in pulling this program together. In order to keep on schedule, you may get to meet Lisa, as she will be giving our speakers their 2-minute warnings. It is now my pleasure to introduce Crystal Carrington, D4DPR board member and secretary, who will introduce the speakers.
Hello, good evening, everyone from the East Coast. Good afternoon if you're on the West Coast. My name is Crystal Carrington. I'm on the board of D4DPR, and I am very pleased to start us off with Dr. Ethan Nadelman. He is the founder of the Lynn Smith Center and the Drug Policy Alliance. He also serves as a drug policy advisor to a wide range of elected officials across the globe, and he is a D4DPR honorary board member, and he'll tell us a little bit more about his pioneering work. So welcome, Dr. Nadelman.
Well, thank you, Crystal. It's an honor to be asked to do this. First I have to say, David, I'm trying to think when we first met, was it literally when I was still teaching at Princeton in the early 90s or shortly thereafter?
Nope.
But I remember we had
It
the
was
Princeton
many
connection
years
going way
later.
back.
It was when I wrote my first article. You'll hear me mention that. And you said that it was a good job, but you had could quibble on a few points that I made.
And was that still in the 90s or a little after that?
2010.
Oh, 2010, really? Just then. Okay. For some reason, I thought you and I went even further back than that. But what I want to start off by saying is obviously, my adult life has been devoted so profoundly to the cause of ending the war on drugs and promoting drug policies grounded in science, compassion, health, and human rights. And for me, it's been both an inspiration and a source of immense frustration to see the role that medical professionals, and especially doctors, have played. On the one hand, if you look throughout the history of drug policy reform, some of the most, the kind of godfathers of this stuff. When I was coming up in this, the two great figures were Norman Zinberg at Harvard Medical School and Lester Grinspoon, also at Harvard Medical School. And, Norman was the one who wrote the Drug Set and Setting, was a mentor to huge numbers of people, including some people who don't necessarily fully agree with us. But was just and whom Drug Policy Foundation and then Drug Policy Alliance thereafter named its leading medical award after. Lester was the one authoring and co-authoring books with a lawyer named James Bacalar on wrote the breakout book on marijuana in the 70s. His book, Psychedelics Drug Reconsidered, I think was an incredible book at a time when almost nobody was focusing on this. Wrote on a whole host of other subjects as well, was on the advisory board of Normal, maybe its president. Key figure in this. Andy Weil, MD, and a student of Zinberg's, who did the breakthrough marijuana researched in the 60s as a Harvard medical student, and then went on to write The Natural Mind and the book Chocolate to Morphine, and then Marriage of the Sun and the Moon, and really a pivotal figure in getting people to think about drug use in different ways. And remains, even when he became the guru of integrative medicine, remained faithful to his drug and drug policy origins, never really backed away from that. I wrote down some of these other people here, but they sort of represent the potential of medicine in this. Vincent Dole and Marie Neiswander, the forefathers of and the first breakout researchers on methadone maintenance at Rockefeller University. Bob Newman, the former head of Beth Israel Hospital in New York, who in his spare time, was the number one advocate for methadone maintenance treatment and the number one critic of the methadone treatment system, and played a singular role, especially outside the United States, from Hong Kong to Iran to Germany, you name it, in getting methadone maintenance going. I think about John Morgan at CUNY Medical School, who was just the most prolific writer and encyclopedic knowledge in all these areas, and the number one person testifying against unreasonable drug testing, in American courthouses. David Lewis, who actually professor at Brown, founded the Addiction Studies Center at Brown, and who actually briefly back in the 90s tried to get a group of high-level medical authorities get together and had some little breakout role, but was not able to do what David and now Brian have done with this organization, which is to really build something substantial. I think about Jody Rich from Brown, who's still on the board of Drug Policy Alliance and once again pivotal stuff in the prisons and elsewhere. And then I look internationally at Alex Wodak in Australia, engaging in civil disobedience 30, 40 years ago to get needle exchange going and continue to play a global role. I look at the doctors in Switzerland and the Netherlands, Amros Uchtenhagen starting the heroin prescription experiments, and John Marks in the United Kingdom, and a whole host of others. So medical physicians have played a pivotal leadership role and done that at the local level, the state level, at the federal, international. At the same time, we know doctors have oftentimes legitimized some of the worst policies. They're the ones who have sort of looked at what's in front of their eyes about the harms that drugs can do to people, how much harm people can do to that, but somehow never look at the harms that mass arrest and mass incarceration do. That's what, the doctors who will say, well, we know how problematic marijuana can be for some kids, but never look at how problematic arresting 500,000 young people each year is on their, not just overall well-being, but on their health. We look at the medical professionals who kind of, aligned with the war on drugs, and the researchers who took money to do studies that were then used by people in the war on drugs to block innovative inventions. To block innovative policies. Now, I'll say, one issue that I've talked about with Brian and that I'm really delighted to see this organization stepping out on is the issue of tobacco harm reduction. Because when I stopped running Drug Policy Alliance in 2017, and this issue of tobacco harm reduction and the rapid emergence of vaping and of the pouches and the snus and all these things, the evidence was so powerfully in favor of a harm reduction approach to tobacco and nicotine. And yet many of our old political allies were actually standing on the other side. And even today, you look at the American Heart Association, and Lung Association, Cancer Society, who should know better, but who unfortunately are opposing policies. And I look at them in the same way as I look at the people who oppose needle exchange and methadone maintenance and decriminalization and medical marijuana and marijuana regulation. Stuff that's just not right. And to have an organization like this that can stand up on controversial issues, whether it's this or the kratom issue or the cannabis issue or a whole host of others, and say, look, this is what the science says. This is what our experience as physicians say. We need to do the right thing here. We need to listen carefully to our patients. We need not hold controlled double-blind experiments as the end all and all when it involves taking medications where people have an instantaneous response to how they're feeling, which was the case with medical marijuana, where all the opposition was always, oh, well, we don't have the controlled double-blind studies yet. People were swearing this is the medicine that's helping me. So I just want to express my gratitude for David for his leadership and stepping out on this issue. in beginning to get this organization together. Brian, for carrying the torch thereafter, to the hundreds of members of this organization for doing such an important job in being an important part of the broader alliance of citizens and human beings around the world working to promote drug policies grounded in science, compassion, health, and human rights. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Nadelman. That was extremely inspiring. Thank you so much for what you do. I'd like to introduce next Dr. Janester Wilson King. She is the founder, medical director, and owner of the Victory Rejuvenation Center. She also serves as the president of the Society for Cannabis Clinicians. She is on the special advisory board for the Association of Cannabis Health, Equity, and Medicine, and she's also a D4DPR expert and former D4DPR board member, and we miss her dearly. Welcome, Dr. Janester.
Wow, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to Doctors for Drug Policy Reform for 10 years of insisting that medicine belongs in the center of drug policy conversations. Tonight is a celebration and a marker. We are celebrating the first decade of D4DPR, formerly known as DFCR, what this organization has built, what it has shifted, and the people who have carried it. We are recognizing Dr. David Nathan, founder and first president, whose vision helped bring physicians into a space where our voices were urgently needed and for much too long were missing. And we are reflecting on what has changed, then looking forward to what must come next. I was invited to speak as a representative of the clinical community I represent through my leadership of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians and through my work in the same reform ecosystem David helped shape. I'm honored by that, as Dr. Ethan Nadelman said as well. I'm honored by that because I believe one of the most important developments in the past decade is exactly what you all are here to affirm. Physicians are no longer on the sidelines of drug policy reform. We are at the table. We are in the conversation, and we are increasingly expected to lead. When David Nathan helped launch D4DPR 10 years ago, he didn't just create an organization, he helped to legitimize an idea. That idea was that drug policy is not only a criminal justice issue or a political issue, it is a health issue. It affects bodies, brains, families, and communities. It shapes who gets care, who gets punished, who gets believed, and who gets left behind. David understood that if medicine remained silent, policy would continue to be written without the people who understand health, risk, harm, and healing from the inside out. And he understood something else. Physicians have a unique kind of credibility when we use it well. Not as an appeal to authority, but as an insistence on evidence, compassion, and outcomes that actually matter to human beings. Now, over the past decade, we've watched that credibility changes the landscape. We've seen physician voices help reframe addiction as a treatable medical condition rather than a moral failure. We've seen clinicians push for naloxone access, overdose prevention, and humane approaches that keep people alive long enough to recover. And we've seen medical voices help drive a more realistic conversation about cannabis, one that can hold complexity, that cannabis is not harmless for everyone, and it also isn't the caricature it was made out to be for decades. As an OBGYN, I can tell you when policy is written in fear, I can tell you and I can attest to it, when policy is written in fear, excuse me, it lands hardest on pregnant people, on women, on families already carrying stigma. Too often they are met not with support, but with surveillance, not with care, but with punishment. So one of the most meaningful shifts I've seen, one that aligns with David's vision, is the growing insistence that the default response to substance use should be clinical. Screening with dignity, counseling with honesty, treatment access, and harm reduction, not automatic criminalization. That is what physician leadership can do. It can change the default. Now, D4DPR itself has matured in the same decade. 10 years ago, the idea of a national organization of physicians publicly taking a stand on drug policy reform still felt unusual to many colleagues. Some feared professional risk, some feared reputational harm, some simply believed it wasn't our lane. But today, physicians are increasingly expected to speak not only inside clinic walls, but in the systems that shape health, legislation, regulation, public messaging, and medical education. D4DPR has helped normalize that role. It has created a home for physicians who understand that neutrality in harmful policy environments is not neutral. It has consequences. It has created a professional identity, the clinician as an advocate, the physician as a reformer, the medical voice as a stabilizing force in a very noisy and crowded conversation. And importantly, D4DPR has helped develop a culture, one that encourages physicians to be informed, to be intentional, and to be brave. So what is the next phase? If the first decade was about bringing physicians into the reform movement in a more organized way, visible way, the next decade must be about deepening our influence and improving our effectiveness. That means a few things, and I'm wrapping it up in a minute. First, we need to continue building a physician voice that is evidence-based and clinically grounded, because credibility is our currency. We must be the people who can say with integrity, here is what we know, here is what we don't yet know, and here is what the most humane, least harmful policy looks like while the evidence grows. Second, we must expand the clinical coalition, not just addiction medicine, though that is essential, but primary care, emergency medicine, psychiatry, OBGYN, pediatrics, geriatrics, pain specialists, nurses, pharmacists, because drug policy touches every specialty. Third, we must protect the patient-clinician relationship, a policy environment that turns clinicians into surveillance agents is a policy environment that drives people away from the healthcare system. D4DPR's next chapter should include clear advocacy for policies that make it safer, not riskier, for patients to be honest. And they've already started some of that movement. And finally, lastly, we must embrace the physician's role as a public educator. Misinformation thrives where expertise stays quiet. The next decade of D4DPR should include not only policy advocacy, but clinician to community communication that is truthful, calm, and compassionate. All of that, the maturation of this organization, the path forward, traces back to David Nathan's original premise that medicine cannot outsource drug policy to politics alone. David's leadership wasn't just administrative, it was conceptual, it was moral. He helped create a space where physicians could step into a reform work without losing their identity as clinicians, because this is, at its core, clinical work. So to David, Thank you for founding D4DPR. Thank you for your steady insistence that physician leadership belongs in this arena. And thank you for expanding what doctoring can mean in public life. One final word, the world is not short on opinions about drugs. It is short on policy rooted in care. Physicians can help change that, not alone, but together, through organizations like D4DPR, through professional societies, through the daily courage of clinicians who keep showing up for patients without judgment, and then show up for policy with the same integrity. Congratulations to D4DPR on 10 years. Happy anniversary. And Dr. Nathan, thank you for helping make this physician movement possible. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's Michael Smirkanish, and I wanted to say congratulations to everyone at Doctors for Drug Policy Reform on 10 years of impactful work. From your early days as Doctors for Cannabis Regulation to the broader mission that you've taken on today, you've helped elevate the conversation around drug policy with credibility, science, and compassion, something that's been sorely needed. At a time when these issues are often politicized or misunderstood, your voice as physicians and experts has made a real difference. So congratulations on this milestone. Best wishes for continued success in the years ahead.
It's a pleasure to be a part of the 10th anniversary of Doctors for Drug Policy Reform, part of the celebration of Dr. David Nathan. And I want to thank him for all he's done for all of us as physicians and as for our communities, and for helping us change many of our antiquated drug policies, and for his commitment to all of us, and for the work he's done. He's been a leader, an advocate, a visionary, innovator, and certainly persistent. Thank you for all you've done, and thank you for all the physicians that are attending this celebration and continue to work hard and know that we're not there yet and we have much to do. Thank you.
Hey. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and thank you, Dr. Genester, for a very wonderful, wonderful segment. Really appreciate that. I think every med school class needs to hear your bit. Now I'd like to introduce David Valancourt. He is the chair of the American Society for Testing and Materials International's Committee, D37 on Cannabis. He's also the CEO and founder of the consulting firm, the GMP Collective, and he is also board chair and co-founder of the nonprofit S3 Collective. Welcome, David Valancourt. Thank you so much for being here.
So much, Dr. Harrington. Yeah, I think that's enough responsibilities in my title. So I will stop there and not take on any more organizations. This is amazing to be here. So I'm going to share my screen for a second here because it's very relevant to this conversation. So a couple of months ago, I walked into a Total Wine down in Florida while I was speaking at a conference on cannabis beverages. And as a resident of Colorado, and many folks here that are active in the cannabis space might find it weird to see so much cannabis at a Total Wine, not at a dispensary, because that's where it lives in the state of Colorado and many other places. So to see a THC beverage aisle in a major American retailer stretch the length of a wall is kind of wild. Dozens of brands, seltzers, mocktails, and sodas. And on at least half of those bottles, I saw the same yellow triangle with a cannabis leaf inside of it. And that symbol is on those bottles because 10 years ago, one physician in New Jersey, Dr. David Nathan, that we're all here to celebrate as triumphing and founding this organization, decided that doctors had been spectators in cannabis policy for long enough in a really big and significant way. And so tonight I'm honored to be able to share a small piece of what that decision has meant from my perspective. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm not a physician. I chair ASTM International, as mentioned, Committee D37 on cannabis and hemp as of just a couple of months ago. I run that consulting firm, GMP Collective, and a nonprofit, the S3 Collective, where we're being the stand serving as the standards development accelerator for the global cannabis marketplace, linking research to standards and policy. So I live at that very unique intersection where standards, research, and policy come together, and it's the same intersection where I've gotten to know Dr. Nathan, Dr. Adnoff, and several of you familiar faces in the room today. And it's why Dr. Nathan and I have become amazing collaborators, and I'm honored to be able to call another David a great friend since I think going back to early 2021, maybe even late 2020 virtually. So I want to just share a bit about how the IICPS, the International Intoxicating Cannabinoids Product Symbol, actually started. So in February 2020, because I didn't have enough responsibilities with organizations, I opened a work item at ASTM's Committee D37 to create a universal symbol for THC products. I knew there was a need. I knew that ASTM was the right place to create that standard, and I thought that by taking on that responsibility, I could find some great leaders to attract the right people that could help bring this together through the incredible consensus process. Between other obligations as a full-time consultant, overextending myself with other initiatives while many people stayed at home watching Tiger King. I did not, so don't give me the spoiler alert, although I think it's maybe a little too late for that. We found an amazing person, Martha Bajek, a sensory scientist out of Canada who agreed to become the technical project lead. And shortly after that, Dr. David Nathan. And unlike so many people that come into the laborious standards, consensus standards process, David Nathan didn't just show up to help in a small way. He really took the reins. He brought in his son, who I believe is here tonight as well, Eli, who I believe was a graphic designer at the student at Penn State at the time, to do the illustration work. And he showed up to countless meetings over, I believe, a year's term. He answered emails at 11 at night when the ballot came back with a handful of negatives, as the ASTM laborious consensus process does. He worked diligently to help resolve all those negatives and get it through the ballot process again. So I may have tried to start that work item, but David Nathan is the reason why it exists today. And it exists in a really significant way. Dr. Nathan, you've done something that no physician until that point has done for the cannabis industry. You saw a problem through to solution for the first international voluntary consensus standard to have such wide adoption. Because you haven't just stopped at getting that standard approved. You've been showing up for 5 years now. I've lost track. I was going through my email inbox of the number of emails to the states and countries that you have reached out to and worked with me on and brought me into to help push this standard forward from just a voluntary consensus standard within the ASTM library to now 10 states. I remember seeing emails to Luxembourg, I believe to Belgium, to Germany. I will never forget when Montana adopted it in 2021. And then we had these long conversations with Vermont, saw New Jersey adopt it. We've got 10 states, Oregon for hemp products, Alabama. I'll never forget the Delaware conversations. Remember hearing from Dr. Adnoff, who got back from South Africa and saying, the symbol's all over products in South Africa. This is a global freaking symbol. So this year, thank you so much, Dr. Nathan, for your relentless efforts, because I believe by the end of this year, with a little bit of luck, it will now enter the global ISO catalog of global warning symbols. This is a really big deal. A symbol that actually works in the same way that's truly universal in nature, unlike anything we've seen in the cannabis industry to date. There's very few things that we as an industry and as stakeholders can agree on, and you've done one thing really well to bring this symbol through to fruition. Your leadership really is incredibly unique and powerful to the destigmatization, and normalization of cannabis use. I think it's not lost on the fact and should not be lost on anybody here that when you reach out to a regulator's office or legislative office, your white coat gives the message credibility that very few people can give. You can't buy that credibility, although I do hear that med school is pretty damn expensive. You can really only earn it through a career. It's definitely not glamorous work doing this voluntary consensus work, drafting those public comments, translating them into other languages. I think that was before AI really could help out, so well done. Making those asks so many times and being so persistent at following up in the way that you have. You've really built something for something, David. This IICPS is a piece of physical infrastructure that makes the legal cannabis industry so much safer in practice every day that it is printed on a label, from the US to South Africa and everywhere in between. And I know that you and the Doctors for Drug Policy Reform organization has really just scratched the surface of what I know the medical expertise can and will provide to global cannabis policy frameworks. It looks like that yellow triangle on the bottle of seltzer in Miami and in 10 states and in South Africa, and on screens in front of government authorities from over 2 dozen countries at a summit in London where I happened to be staying up late tonight, where I was presenting and had this symbol front and center and was able to talk about for almost 10 minutes earlier today. Incredible. Over 2 dozen countries, including, I think, Ghana, that might be one of the next countries to adopt it. I look forward to following up with you on my conversations today with that. So I want to leave with an ask of you all, if I may. Dr. Nathan, you've spent 10 years now proving that physician leadership can produce real infrastructure. And you can't, nor can any single person be the only physician voice inside that standards development for an industry this size. 10 states is not 50. We've got a long ways to go. D441, the IACPS standard, is just one standard in a committee with dozens more to write, from dosing, from product specifications, from warning labels that I know we've already started working on. So whether you're a physician, pharmacist, nurse, researcher, attorney, advocate, or just somebody here in the room that I'm sure we all believe that legal cannabis should be safer tomorrow and more accessible than it is today, please consider rolling up your sleeves and helping us write the next standard. That could look like one of a few things. Join the committee D37. It's $115 a year to be a member. I can get you free membership for up to 18 months. Just shoot me an email. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, or I'm sure David or Brian will give you my email if you don't have it already. That way you can vote and contribute to every consensus standard. Help David and the team out with rulemaking and advocacy efforts, sending those letters, testifying at your state. Or if you want to go a little bit further and be as amazing as Dr. Nathan, come join a technical working group and write the next IACPS-like standard. There's no shortage of standards needed for this industry, so we've got more hands to fill. We've got plenty of hands that we need. Please come join us. So thank you seriously, Dr. Nathan. I think it's just mind-blowingly incredible that 10 years ago, you decided that physicians had been spectators long enough in this industry in a really unique and impactful way. So I appreciate you as an incredible pioneer and somebody that I've learned truly so much from. It's been such a joy getting to know you and work with you. Thank you for you and your son drawing that symbol that didn't exist in a field that was reluctant to take on something like that, in a field where regulators, for some strange reason, were just making them up at the 11th hour of the night and weren't asking for an organization like us to come put our heads together. Because today it's everywhere, on those wine bottles and on those bottles in Total Wine in Miami, on those packages in Florida, and written into code in some way, shape, or form in 10 states. And soon I know that will be the vocabulary of public health warning signs globally through the ISO standard. So happy 10th anniversary to you, Dr. Nathan, to all of you at D4DPR. And I look forward to seeing the next 10 and what you and the white coats can help write and change for the future. Thank you, guys.
I'm Eugene Monroe, and I want to first thank God for the opportunity, for the partnership, for the people, for Dr. David Nathan, Dr. Sue Sisley, DFCR, together with the athletes, were pioneers breaking chains of prohibition, not just in professional sports, but on a state level and even a national level. I just turned 39, and as I look back in reflection over the past decade, it began with a decision to cut against the grain and begin a calculated push to change the narrative of cannabis in sports. Stigma, arrests, and failed tests seem to stifle any movement in policy as we continue watching cannabis tarnish the character and careers of athletes each year. Meeting DFCR and creating an athletic initiative would prove successful not just for athletes, but again, for those voices who were fighting to change the healthcare landscape across the nation. And so I just want to say thank you to all that were involved. Thank you for all who continue the work now, and not just solely focused on cannabis, but other drugs that are beneficial to athletes and people at large, as we look at the psychedelic space too.
On behalf of the Marijuana Policy Project, we are so grateful to Dr. Nathan for his vision, integrity, and leadership. From playing a leading role in cannabis legalization in New Jersey to appearing on CNN and testifying before Congress, Dr. Nathan has been a clarion voice explaining that prohibition causes more harm than cannabis itself. Dr. Nathan and the medical professionals organized by Doctors for Drug Policy Reform have been instrumental to educating lawmakers and the public about the health benefits of legal regulation and to moving us to a place where more than half of Americans now live in states where adult use cannabis is legal. It is such a pleasure and honor to work with you and your colleagues at Doctors for Drug Policy Reform. Happy anniversary and thank you.
Hi, Doctors for Drug Policy Reform. I'm Darby Beck, COO of Law Enforcement Action Partnership and the original secretary of what was then Doctors for Cannabis Reform. When David Nathan asked me to come on, he didn't really have much idea what he was doing. What he did have was tremendous will, patience, and dedication to creating an organization that would give doctors a way to advance sensible drug policies based in evidence and best practice. Though he had little experience in nonprofit administration, he really showed up. He was willing to put in not just the administrative and thought labor, but the emotional labor that comes with starting a completely new org. He worked nights and weekends, he cut back his practice, and he and his family all sacrificed to create this wonderful organization. I think it was worth it. Thank you, David.
Very pleased and honored to introduce Dr. David Nathan. But before I do, I just wanted to say a few words. Since I've known him, he's wonderful to work with. I never really had experience with advocacy. We don't really talk about it that much in med school. And even when they talk about physician leadership, it's usually within the context of, clinical institutions or academia. So after joining D4DPR, I really understood the scope and magnitude of what he did. And I still feel very humbled to be a part of this group. And just working with David, I can tell you he's passionate, engaged, knowledgeable, and he's an extraordinary example of what physician advocacy should look like. And working with him, I firmly believe that advocacy needs to be a part of every physician's career in any form, especially with drug policy, seeing what happens with the criminal justice system. So I am so pleased to introduce him. He's shown me that our voice has to extend beyond the clinical setting. And so I am very honored to be a part of D4DPR and truly, truly grateful that Dr. Nathan pioneered this group. So with that, I'll read his bio. David Nathan is a psychiatrist, writer, speaker, educator, and consultant. He is best known as the founder and past president of Doctors for Drug Policy Reform, formerly Doctors for Cannabis Reform. He is a Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and a Clinical Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. He has testified extensively before legislative bodies in states around the country, and he's played a key role in New Jersey's successful cannabis legalization campaign. And he was one of two physicians to speak at the U.S. House Judiciary Committee, their committee's first hearing on cannabis legalization in 2019. He is a leader in the development of evidence-based labeling standards with the IICPS, And he was the principal designer with his son of this symbol. And this is just another example that shows just how far his impact is with his advocacy. So again, very honored to introduce Dr. Nathan, and I will let him take it away.
Thank you so much, Crystal, and it's been wonderful working with you as well. And thank you all so much for the just kind and generous words this evening. I'm touched beyond measure, and if I say too much about it, I'll never get through what I need to say tonight. So I'd like to round out tonight's celebration with a discussion of my personal journey and its connection to the past, present, and future of D4DPR. So let's start back in the 1900s. I grew up as a drug warrior in the white suburb of Philadelphia, a world in which illegal drugs were lethal and immoral. Those who used them deserved whatever consequences they received, and those who engaged in their commerce had forfeited their right to freedom or even life itself. And parenthetically, I clearly did not remember to wear a nice shirt on picture day. And the message on my t-shirt now makes me wonder how I survived so many years of formal education. My views changed abruptly in 1991, my first year in medical school, when I was the graphics editor for a medical ethics journal. The subject of this issue was drug legalization, and I laid out dueling essays by President Reagan's drug czar, William Bennett, and by a very young Princeton professor named Ethan Nadelman. And to answer Ethan's earlier question, I feel like I knew you very well many years before I ever came to your attention. Ethan clearly documented how the drug war had failed by every metric, with dramatic increases in drug use, violence, mass incarceration, and obscene racial disparities in the enforcement of drug laws. And I realized that if even half of what he was saying was true, I had had it all wrong. The evidence was clear and the epiphany was brutal. The war on drugs was actually a war on people, and it caused more harm to our nation than the drugs themselves. During my residency, addictionologists I work with openly mocked opponents of the drug war, and so I kept quiet for many years. But in my private practice, I heard story after story of patients whose lives had been permanently derailed by a minor cannabis arrest. People of color, people of limited means, people who were on their way to a better life. And by 2010, I had heard enough. So I published an article, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. I thought I was adding my voice to many other like-minded physicians, but the buzz generated by the article showed that I was apparently out in front of other doctors on this issue. This piece led to more articles, speaking opportunities, often from DPA, and media interviews. And by 2014, that fifth grade drug warrior was on the steering committee of New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform, the ultimately successful legalization push by the ACLU, NAACP, LEAP, Latino Action Network, and other organizations. And here you see us planning our launch in the dining room of our Princeton home, with J.H. Barr, who I see is in attendance this evening, second from the right. I quickly learned that there was no active doctors organization in the United States or anywhere in the world dedicated to cannabis legalization specifically or drug policy reform generally. And when I nervously became the first physician to testify for full cannabis legalization in New Jersey, I kept thinking, physicians like me need an organization behind us when we walk into these rooms. So after a year of planning, recruitment of like-minded physicians and nonprofit experts, and countless hours of work, Doctors for Cannabis Regulation was quietly incorporated in 2015. I made our logo a modified version of the logo I designed for that ethics journal, emphasizing medicine and justice. We launched on April 18th, 2016, enabling us to capitalize on the annual media interest in 420 with an exclusive in the Washington Post. That day, we published our Declaration of Principles, which asserted that cannabis prohibition is harmful, ineffective, and unnecessary. concluding that we all signed the Declaration with confidence in the judgment of history. Our early leaders were, in my wife's words, the dream team of doctors for cannabis legalization. Among the key players was Darby Beck, my closest advisor throughout my presidency. Likewise, Udi Ofer gave invaluable early advice to the nascent board and helped us set up with a game-changing grant from the Open Society Foundations, which kept us funded for years. Sue Sisley also brought us funding and credibility when we badly needed both. And the late David Lewis gave us the confidence to argue that the criminalization of drug use is morally, logically, and scientifically indefensible. And then there's Joycelyn Elders. Whoever said you should never meet your heroes never met Dr. Elders. My wife Karen and I spent an afternoon with her in 2018, and she was as brilliant, principled, and fearless as I had imagined. She's been involved in numerous D4DPR projects, and collaborating with her has been one of the great privileges of my professional life. None of this could have happened without the help of volunteers like Laura Baird, who designed our first website, Susie Wills, who I see is here tonight, who handled our accounting since before our incorporation, Antoinette O'Neill, our bookkeeper, and my wife Karen, who never asked to be part of this, yet emceed the launch of NJUMR before opening DFCR's first bank account, and she shares the credit for anything I've accomplished. I'd also like to thank our now adult children, Eli and Sophie, who inspired my quest for future generations of kids to grow up with better drug education in schools. And thanks to those involved in D4DPR behind the scenes, including Lisa Capitani and Stephen Carter in operations, and Hunter Platzman and Sandy Gutstein in special projects. And thank you, Lisa and Hunter, for all you've done for tonight. We're also greatly indebted to allied organizations who supported us from the beginning, in particular, of course, the Drug Policy Alliance with Kat Packer and Maritza Perez Medina, and of course, Ethan as their founder, the Marijuana Policy Project with Karen O'Keefe, and NORML with my frequent collaborator, Paul Armentano. From day one, earned media has been D4DPR's main tool because we're the medical community's loudest voice dedicated to ending the failed war on drugs. We have little trouble getting opportunities for articles, interviews, and testimonies from around the country. This has helped us recruit physician members in nearly every US state and around the world. When, contrary to expectations, physicians argue against the drug war, media outlets see this as a newsworthy man bites dog story, and they give us a platform. With this in mind, we launched a campaign in 2016 with current and former NFL players to end the league's ban on cannabis. While an important issue in its own right, the considerable media attention also highlighted the NFL campaign as a microcosm of the principles we bring to every issue. We are champions of public health and social justice, whether we're fighting inequitable drug bans in professional sports or racial disparities in the enforcement of our nation's drug laws. Today, the ban technically remains in place, but the pressure brought to bear on the NFL Commissioner's Office largely eliminated penalties for cannabis use in 2020. I believe that our campaign, with activist and former NFLer Eugene Monroe as our athletics ambassador, helped neutralize the opposition, and this is a theme I will return to shortly. Standing on the shoulders of giants, in 2019, I testified at the first ever U.S. House Judiciary Committee hearing on cannabis legalization. On behalf of hundreds of physician members, I told Congress that cannabis prohibition had done far more damage to public health than cannabis itself. From our earliest days, I had always planned to turn over the presidency of DFCR to a more experienced leader whenever one came along. As it turned out, that leader was with us from the beginning. Dr. Brian Adenoff joined the board as a highly respected world-class addictionologist, researcher, and journal editor. He was a supporter of drug policy reform long before I published my first article, and he seized every opportunity to get more active at DFCR. In 2021, Brian agreed to become our second president, and under his formidable leadership, the organization has thrived like never before. Even before DFCR's launch, we envisioned a time when our physician advocates would go beyond the low-hanging fruit of cannabis regulation, embracing a broader mission of harm reduction and psychedelics policy. By 2023, with cannabis legalization spreading across the nation and around the world, we expanded our mission, and DFCR became Doctors for Drug Policy Reform. One of Brian's major initiatives has been the Health Advocacy Network. Funded by a grant from the Drug Policy Alliance, the HAN equips health professionals with the tools to become effective drug policy advocates while providing a forum for participants to exchange ideas and share speaking and writing opportunities. Another project just getting started is POSE, funded by our old friends at the Open Society Foundations. We're partnering with organizations like the Legal Action Center to ensure that opioid settlement funds are directed to drug treatment rather than the plugging of state budget gaps. After stepping down from the presidency, I combined my advocacy with my lifelong interest in graphic design. Back in 1991, I envisioned the appearance of a hypothetical regulated cannabis product package when none yet existed. Almost 30 years later, I began designing labeling standards for actual cannabis products in partnership with ASTM, and especially with David Valancourt, including a cannabis product symbol, now used in 10 states, evidence-based warning language, now used in at least one state, and a comprehensive cannabis information label. While those projects continue, I'm looking ahead to other concepts, including the newly invented THC content badge making its debut tonight, which is a much needed indicator of total THC in a package, and a psychedelic product symbol. Like D4DPR itself, these graphics are designed to neither glamorize nor demonize drugs, only to inform and to protect public health and safety. In 2021, we published this op-ed on CNN calling out the AMA for denouncing racism while simultaneously supporting the drug war, one of the most powerful instruments of systemic racism in American history. Since then, the AMA's positions have shifted considerably, and we don't claim sole credit, but I want to name an operative principle that I think is arguably the most important lesson of D4DPR's decade of work. With a topic as emotionally charged as drug policy, we don't always win converts, but we have been highly effective at neutralizing the opposition. When our watertight arguments create undeniable doubt in the minds of fellow physicians, who are generally logical, they stop promoting the racist, ineffective, and cruel war on drugs. When an individual or organization that once worked against us goes quiet, and our message advances without opposition, that's a win. I urge everyone listening tonight to continue the process of neutralizing the medical community's opposition to drug policy reform with evidence, persistence, and confidence that history is on our side. 10 years ago, 50 American physicians signed the declaration. Today, hundreds of health professionals around the world carry that declaration forward. And today, we celebrate what we have built. Thanks to everyone who made this evening possible. Thanks to all of you for your support of D4DPR, and onward to our second decade. Thank you.
Hi, I would like to express my deep appreciation to our speakers, Ethan, Janester, and David V, for their thoughtful and generous contributions, and to those who provided their video reflections. David, thank you for your vision, persistence, and leadership. I've often said I would not have started DFCR as I lacked David's vision. But a few weeks ago, I attended a Drug Policy Alliance webinar in which its executive director, Cassandra Frederick, interviewed Scott Nakagawa, a civil rights organizer and political strategist. Nakagawa framed harm reduction as an anti-authoritarian stance. challenging punitive approaches to drug use is to reject coercion and punishment as primary tools. It challenges legal, medical, and social systems that impose control. And it supports autonomy, dignity, and limits of state power. Thus, it is threatening to those who support an authoritarian power structure. This framing is particularly timely as authoritarian approaches are gaining traction in the United States and globally. So David was just a general psychiatrist in a solo private practice, and he decides to publicly take on the powerful medical system that has for decades been complicit with the drug war. So I don't just envy David's vision, I envy his courage. In retrospect, his founding of our organization was heroic. We've been here for 10 years, but there is so much more that needs to be done. If you are not yet a member of D4DPR, I encourage you to join. If you are a member, I encourage you to stay engaged. The support link is in the chat. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we are offering our limited edition of the original DFCR Declaration of Principles documents. And David showed this a couple times in his talk. It is printed on hemp paper. It is suitable for framing. It is signed by David Nathan and former U.S. Surgeon General Joycelyn Elders, who you heard from earlier. It is available to donors at $75. And once the documents are gone, they're gone. Again, the link will be in the chat and is on our website. This document honors the DFCR origins of D4DPR and will support our future. Thank you for being here tonight. Your presence honors David and our work, and we look forward to continuing this work together. And good night.